Super excited to start talking about interfaces and third-party tools. This is our third module, and we're really going to extend your data out into the world through different types of interfaces and third-party tools. Airtable launched interfaces in early 2022, and it's been a really incredible transformation for the software itself. Essentially, it's like giving a face to the data inside of your database, and you can create custom interfaces that allow people to see data relevant to their workflow and really allow people to just interact with the interface rather than giving them access to all of the data in the Airtable base. It's really powerful in being able to share your data with different team members and executing on workflows that's core to a single person's role. In our third-party tool section, we're going to cover Onto Air, Pory, MiniExtensions, and Stacker. There are two subsets of tools. One is more focused on the portal end of it. So MiniExtensions, Pory, and Stacker are the three tools that all have their own versions of portals. And the second category of third-party tools is really extending the functionality of Airtable. MiniExtensions also has a lot of different smaller toolkits that you can add on top of your Airtable to extend its functionality. And Onto Air is really good in a lot of our projects as well. And we're going to show you how we use both Onto Air and MiniExtensions to help different organizations. In this section, we're also going to have a lot of input from our internal Airtable wits, Chantal, and she's going to walk through lots of the different third-party tools that she's worked with in past client projects and really highlight when and how and why we should be using these tools in the different sections. I also wanted to insert a disclaimer here. You might be thinking, Cherry, what is a portal? You've already mentioned it several times, and it seems like every single tool has a portal. Well, there is some truth to that. A lot of these third-party tools are extending your data into the outside world. So whether you're using interfaces or using Pory or using Stacker, they have different use cases. And we'll talk a little bit through how to decide on what tool to use in what sorts of situations. You can think of a portal like a house. You might have a very similar house to your neighbor, and there's a very similar layout between your house and your neighbor's house, but there could be an infinite number of ways in which you showcase your house by decorating it in its interior and also painting it differently from the outside. So it's really adding a layer on top of your data so that your data can be represented differently to different people.
Thanks for investing in your own knowledge base. I'm Cherry Yang, the founder of Claribase. We're going to be releasing our flagship course, Airtable Mastery, for free. In the course, you can find over 100 videos on topics like design, integration, automations, and interfaces. It's perfect for the Airtable champion who wants to build their database right the first time. You can sign up for the course at the link down below.
I'm really excited to be demonstrating Stacker for you guys today. Stacker is unique because it essentially allows you to build an app on top of your Airtable data. It's a really intuitive way for your customers or for your team members to work with Airtable data. And what's really unique about Stacker is that it allows for people to see, modify, and access your data without actually paying for their seat in Airtable in itself. So you can see that if you have a lot of different customers that may need access to certain parts of your data, that it can be a money-saving tool in itself because you may only have about 10 people working actively behind the scenes in your Airtable database, but 100 people interacting and using the data or adding data for you. So when I talk about controlling the access to your data, basically what this means is that within Stacker, you have fully flexible permissioning. So this allows you to really hone in and control who sees what. Permissioning in Stacker works on two foundational principles. So one being record level rules and the other being user roles. And I'm going to get into exactly what each of those mean. But I do want to preface this section by saying that permissions in themselves can be quite cumbersome to set up. So I want to walk you through what each one means and then give you some advice on how to tackle setting up your permissions if you do decide to go down that route with this software. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about record level permissions. So these permissions exist on a particular table to limit the access to the records seen on that table. These rules function on the principle of what is called an ownership filter in Stacker. And an ownership filter is related to the user using Stacker. And that is then connected back to an email that exists within the Airtable database. So to be able to set this up, you will need a list of Stacker users and their email addresses that they're going to be using to log into Stacker. That way, Stacker knows who is using the app and what records they are related to. This is important because if you want to set up relational permissioning, that is possible within Stacker, meaning that you can create rules where people are only seeing the data that they are directly linked to, whether they're assigned to it or are connected through these records in another capacity. As I alluded to, these rules work on the foundational principles of linking within your base. So you'll have to make sure that the links exist in the right places and that your users are somehow connected to that data. Another important thing to think about when it comes to permissioning is that these rules that you set up on a per table basis automatically apply to all users in the beginning. However, this is where user roles come into play, which I'm going to talk about next. Essentially, the user roles allow you to bucket your users into different types of categories that you might want to use for these different roles. You can think about it as if your VP might need to see all of the data, not just the data that they are directly linked to. So in that sense, setting up a permission where people can only see data where they're linked to on the table is not going to work for everyone in your organization. So with a user group, you can then create separate rules on these tables for each of these groups. That being said, you can grant full access to your VP, where individual team members may only get access to the clients or data that they're directly working with. You may have already clued into, permissioning in Stacker can get complex quite quickly, especially when you start layering table permissions with user roles. So I actually have some advice that I use when I set up Stacker for clients that I'd like to share with you. As we've been talking about in this course, it's really important to take a step back away from your data before you actually think about setting up permissioning rules. My recommendation and what I always ask of my clients is to give me a very clear list of who can access what on which tables, because having this list is going to guide how you set up your rules. Make sure that you've thought about all of the different use cases and who can access what in what scenarios. By writing this all down, you basically are creating a list of rules that you'll need to set up your permissions to adhere to. You also want to think about the buckets of rules that you can assign to the different people using your database, because you may be able to condense a lot of these rules just by setting up user roles. When in doubt, it can be a little bit challenging at first, but as long as your linking is set up correctly and you have a clear outline, you'll surely get the hang of it soon enough. Before we jump into talking about Stacker a little bit further, I did want to give an overview of the pricing of Stacker and how much it might cost to implement a solution in Stacker. So as you can see on my screen, there are a few different pricing tiers available in Stacker, ranging from Starter all the way to Pro. Starter is $59 a month, and with that, you'll get one app, unlimited external users, but you are limited in the number of records that can be used within Stacker, limited to 10,000 total. You do get record permissions, but they are quite limited. The next step up is Plus. With Plus, you are able to create 3 separate apps. You get unlimited records, which is great, and permissioning becomes a little bit more advanced. And then Pro, which is $290 a month, is everything that we've already discussed, but you'll have unlimited apps, 10 collaborator seats, meaning you can have 10 people working on the back end and setting up Stacker. You get advanced permissioning with roles and multiple table permissions, and we will talk about permissions in just a bit. And generally, we find that most of our clients like to go with Pro because one of the main reasons they decide to use Stacker is to hide sensitive information from certain parties. As you can see, the pricing might look a little bit expensive at first, but when you compare it to being able to have basically unlimited users interact with your Airtable data and see it, you can see that this could actually be quite a big cost savings because you won't need to have X number of users within your Airtable database and paying for their seats. So now I want to take some time to talk about a couple of use cases where Stacker might be especially helpful and things that we've seen working with our previous clients. So one example that I can pull out of my mind is the idea of, say, you're a government agency working with multiple different service providers. In this case, there's probably some degree of collaboration between you, the government agency, and the different service providers you're working for. However, the providers themselves don't really have much collaboration between each other. So in this case, you're only going to show your partner organizations information and data that is directly relevant to them and the work that they are doing for you. Another really good example that I like to think of is the idea of a client-facing portal. So say that you were a service provider or people commission different work from you. One thing that you could set up is the idea of having your customers come into a portal, see maybe the copy you've written or the marketing campaign that you've designed, and approve it. That when in this situation, you may be working for many different clients, but when your clients log into the portal, they're only going to see work that has been commissioned by them, and they're only going to be able to approve that. So that way you hide any proprietary data or any conflicts of interest that might exist between the different companies that you serve. Now that we've talked about a couple of different use cases, I think it would only be reasonable to actually dig into a demo example of what Stacker could actually look like for your organization. So that's what I've got pulled up here. This example is a customer tracker app or CRM that has been built by Stacker itself. So what we're looking at on the screen right now is a list of companies. And so when I click on any one of these companies, I'm taken to a page that includes all kinds of information about that company. And you can see that the data is being displayed in a way that feels a lot more like a piece of software or an app than if you were to just display this one record in Airtable. Another cool feature is being able to show some related records, which is being shown right here. In this case, we can look at the different cases that have been associated with this customer. They're having some issues with their account or want some setup assistance. You can also see all the contacts related to this specific company, which is quite useful. And you can set up multiple pages, which we see up here on the top. And so one is details about the company, which we just went over. And the next is an idea of looking at a contract. So you can see that it's an embedded widget, which means that you can embed different things into Stacker to make it even more useful for your organization, depending on the different types of tools that they use. So we also have a tab here for the cases themselves. So this is kind of neat because you can see that it's displayed as a Kanban board and you're able to move different things very easily, and it feels really reminiscent or adjacent to a lot of tools that are used on the market. You can look at what's been opened, what's been closed, and just all of the cases as a whole. This is a very simple example of what Stacker can do, but I do think it brings a good picture of what you can expect your app to look like. So a lot of the customization within Stacker will look very similar. A lot of it is in how you choose to display your data and what tables you have. There isn't a ton of opportunity to make this app feel very branded, so that is something to consider. You aren't able to change like header images or different things like that. It's all very limited in that scope. So a lot of your apps are going to look quite similar. I did also want to mention that within Stacker itself and in this demo, there isn't any specific permissioning happening here in this example, but you can extrapolate based on what we talked about earlier, that if I was somebody who was the account manager for Topvine, Itinerary, and Estate client, I could potentially only see those 3 clients just to not overcrowd what I'm looking at day to day and working on. Before we end our section on Stacker, I did want to talk about a couple of considerations that you'll want to take before deciding to adopt Stacker in itself. Stacker can come with a lot of work. Setting up permissioning can be very time-consuming and cumbersome. So we really recommend for small teams that they really think about why they want to use Stacker and whether or not it will be very useful for them. Historically, Stacker has been a really helpful tool for small and large teams alike because it served as a really useful front end to your data and made working with your data a lot more intuitive. But with the introduction of interfaces, a lot of that small team work can be accomplished quite easily within Airtable itself. And with that, you will have one less system to maintain as a smaller team. Of course, when it comes to larger teams where you might have hundreds of users interacting and using your data, it would probably make sense to choose to use Stacker because you aren't going to be setting up individual interfaces for all of your different hundreds of users with different rules, and of course paying the thousands of dollars that it would take to give them all seats in your Airtable platform. So just as a conclusion, really think about what can be accomplished in Airtable and the benefits that Stacker is bringing to your organization, because it is no small undertaking.